morning, everyone. As Alistair so eloquently put it, my name's Laurence Ritchie. I'm obviously presenting to you on essentially how to specify the right timber products for cost efficiency. It's based on my somewhat sort of broad experience, as Alistair explained. So I know Alistair introduced me briefly there and did a brilliant job, but just I suppose cover off on things very quickly. Obviously, I do have a background in construction, in costing. As Alistair mentioned, I spent a bit over 4 years with the WoodSolutions Mid-Rise Advisory Program, talking with obviously designers, specifiers around obviously using timber construction systems in mid-rise construction. And obviously I gleaned quite a bit from that sort of experience, and I'm hoping to share some of that with you today. More recently, I have spent a bit of time working with Deloitte PDS in the project management sort of space. And as Alistair mentioned, I've recently moved off to start my own firm, which is an independent materials library or a samples library, which offers product samples to specifiers and designers. So if you'd be interested to learn a bit more about that, obviously feel free to check out the website or just get in touch with me. Also potentially of interest, if you're interested in building products, is a podcast which I'm a co-host of, which is called The Specification. It's been really interesting. We've recorded with a number of really interesting building suppliers. Most recent one was Dulax, who we caught up with on Friday. So look forward to releasing that sometime soon. So make sure to check that one out. So before we really get into the presentation, I just wanted to sort of say, I suppose, on behalf of WoodSolutions, WoodSolutions is very excited and obviously proud to have recently partnered with the AIQS, or the Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, to essentially expand their, our support and educational resources to all AIQS members, as well as all other sort of cost consultants currently out there in the market. We're doing some really exciting stuff with them. We're actually in the process of organising a couple of tours of different facilities, as well as a few other sort of resources and potential events. So well worth, if you are a member of the IQS, keep an eye out for newsletters and things which may mention us. And if you're not a member of the IQS, still, of course, get in touch. You know where to find all of our resources on woodsolutions.com.au. And if you do have any questions around pricing timber, please do just let us know. Right, so without further ado, let's get into this presentation. So just to, I suppose, give you a high-level overview of the structure of what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at a bit of context, sort of why are we giving this presentation? Why do I think it's important? I suppose what our options are when we're building with timber, what we may really, an important thing to consider when we're doing any project, which are of course our project goals. 3 real key considerations, which I believe are really important if we're looking for design efficiency and cost efficiency in what we're doing, and then a bit of a conclusion, which will wrap everything up and hopefully, bring everything together for all of us. So let's get into it. So as I'm sure you'll know, if you've been a regular of these webinars for the last couple of years, you'll be well aware of this. But for anyone who may be somewhat new, timber construction is well and truly established in our market in Australia. We've got a selection of projects on the screen in front of you, but of course, this is just a small sample of what we've seen. Either constructed or started or designed or even just approved over the last couple of years. And you can see we've got predominantly some really large projects here, but we've also seen some really beautiful smaller projects as well. So we're just going to go through and have a quick look at some examples of some of the beautiful projects which have been realised in Australia in recent years, and I suppose get some sort of understanding of how that might be influencing our market and more importantly influencing what our clients are asking for and what that means from a pricing and costing point of view. So of course we've got Avio Bella Vista, which is a beautiful aged care facility in Norwest and in Sydney, built in 2017. One of the early mid-rise mass timber projects in the country. and really just a great success story in every way. A really beautiful project. And as you can see there, predominantly, well, just mass timber in the superstructure. There was obviously some concrete up to, I think it was level sort of 2-ish. It was, half a floor, which was concrete, half a floor, which was timber. And then all timber above there. So that was really an early win, I suppose, for timber projects in that mid-rise space in Australia. More recently, we've seen Wellington Collingwood, which we've actually had webinars on with WoodSolutions. So I really recommend, if you're interested to learn a bit more about this building, an amazing mid-rise mass timber structure. You can see there with a concrete core right in Melbourne's very urban sort of centre of Fitzroy Collingwood area. Yeah, I recommend checking out those webinars to learn a bit more about it. A beautiful building, currently under construction on site at the moment. And obviously, again, another big win for timber construction around the country. It's not all big though, as I mentioned. There are some massive projects out there around Australia, but we've also got these smaller, residential projects. This is, of course, still a really high-profile project and still quite large as domestic projects go, but a beautiful one, as you can see, really making the most of the performance of different timber products in their uses. As you can see, CLT used to its best, and glulam used to its best as well there. A really, really beautiful project down at, obviously, Ceres in Victoria. Another domestic project which uses angles, but this time in a sort of sawtooth roof warehouse style sort of structure, and again using CLT and glulam in a really sort of beautiful form, which of course is quite unique, but I'm sure you'll agree with me, really, really beautiful and very successful as far as timber buildings go. These are obviously really beautiful projects. They have a lot of exposed timber, and they are really, high profile, very aesthetic, very, suitable for photography and architecture magazines. But often we forget about the other systems which are there, which is something I really want to sort of shine a bit of a light on today, which are sort of the lightweight systems. And in these projects, such as Olea here, which is also in Victoria, multi-residential project, where it's been built out of timber framing, it's, the timber isn't necessarily on show, but the work it's doing is really significant, and it's delivering a really high quality outcome for quite an affordable price when you look at the per square metre sort of price. So I really recommend, always sort of looking down this sort of path if you are considering timber, and we'll delve into that a little bit further in this presentation. I should also say on Olea, I know certainly we've got some really great resources on the WoodSolutions website if you're interested to learn more about this project or similar mid-rise timber frame projects. We've had presentations from Project Grey resources on the website, so make sure to check those out. We've also seen projects like this popping up all over the country. They're really everywhere. They could be 4 stories or more, but as we can see here, we've got a great 3-story multi-residential structure, which is built using timber frame. And we can see, obviously, some sort of composite floor trusses there. And this is obviously, we could call it the quiet, the silent hero, I guess, of our construction industry in Australia. We're obviously all very, very familiar with building with timber framing in our detached residential construction systems. And obviously taking that up to the 3-story space, multi-residential space, it's not another magnitude of complexity. It remains pretty much as simple. Obviously, you just need to be talking with the designers and suppliers who are used to working with it in these spaces. And you can, achieve really good quality outcomes and really high quality, sites as well from a construction point of view that can be very sort of clean, tidy, and safe at the end of the day. We've also seen these lightweight framing systems taken into the prefabrication space. So I'm sure you're somewhat familiar if you've seen any of the other webinars with the opportunity around prefabrication with massive timber systems. of course, with lightweight, it is the same, or even more so suited to prefabrication, as you can see here in this really impressive project by Mirvac out over in Doncaster in Victoria, and a housing estate called Tullamore. You can see obviously here they were prefabricated wall panels, and the same, there were floor cassettes as well, which could be assembled into domestic housing at significantly higher speeds than would typically be the case if we're looking at just doing a stick frame on site. And obviously there's potentially some quality benefits there as well. So yeah, really interesting things happening, particularly in that lightweight framing space. So this is an amazing project in Sweden, designed by White Architecture, and I'm gonna absolutely murder this name, so I forgive me, but in Skellefteå in Sweden. I'm sure any Swedish people on the call, just reeling from that. Well worth checking out. It's called the Culture House. Beautiful project. And these trusses you can see, which are a composite of steel and timber across the roof, they're actually holding up a timber tower, which is over this massive span. So really, impressive in sort of design. But we do find, because these projects are obviously the ones that get the photos, they're very Instagrammable. They make news quite a lot. It's what a lot of clients sort of have in their mind of what they want when they think of timber projects. And I suppose the point of this presentation, and some of the really something that's really important to consider, is that not all timber projects have to look like this, and not all timber projects have to have all of the timber exposed. And that obviously, if we do that the right way, we can still have some very positive outcomes from an aesthetic point of view. We can have very happy clients while maintaining some sort of cost efficiency in certain locations. There is also the really important note here that just because timber is exposed, it doesn't mean that it is the most expensive way of doing it. Often having, exposed timber in certain spaces obviously means you don't have linings on that exposed surface. And in certain situations, it can actually be more cost efficient to have mass timber exposed than having it lined with the required levels of FRA rating. So I suppose, as we'll get into a little bit in this presentation, just one system isn't necessarily the answer to cost efficiency. It's often, a bit of column A, a bit of column B with the timber products. And hopefully with this presentation, we'll be able to, I suppose, explain a little bit of that and make it a little bit clearer for everyone. So as I'm sure many are aware, in 2016, the National Construction Code brought in timber construction in the mid-rise space as a deemed to satisfy solution, which essentially just meant that it made it easier to achieve certification for buildings in that sort of height range where timber is predominantly used as a structural material. That, of course, it's not a silver bullet. Obviously, we haven't seen every project built in timber above in that sort of mid-rise space since 2016, but it is really interesting. We are starting to see, obviously, many more projects in this space. And, it's interesting because we do see a vast majority of those projects do not comply with deemed to satisfy requirements, but having those deemed to satisfy requirements there, it does make it easier for design teams to design a efficient, I suppose, successful building which can achieve compliance and achieve the sign-offs they need with a little bit more ease. It does make it it provides, I suppose, a certainty level where you can design certain parts of the building to meet these requirements and other parts to meet the performance requirements, which you may well be aware of by now. And it's not really the scope of this presentation to delve into too much further, but it is just worth noticing that this is now part of the National Construction Code, and it's part of the reason why we are seeing more construction in this mid-rise space. So the first thing which we really need to consider when we're looking to build a project out of timber is, what are the options in terms of timber products? What can we choose to actually build the project with? Because as I sort of alluded to before, we will rarely ever, if ever, say that one product is the cheapest or the most efficient way to build a structure. More often than not, it'll be a variety of different products, whether that's all in the mass timber space or whether it's a variety of mass timber lightweight, or if it's just lightweight systems with a little bit of LVL here and there, or a little bit of glulam here or there. There will be different answers for different projects. So let's get into it. So for those of us who may not be aware, these are sort of the major timber products which we talk about these days. Yes, there's many more projects beyond the 5 that you can see on the screen, but these products do certainly form the majority of the timber construction that we see in the market. For that reason, it's what we'll be sort of considering today. There may absolutely be other products which are more suitable for your specific project, depending on the size and type, your certain design requirements, whether that be such to do with the span or exposure levels, and of course your geographic location as well, depending on what you might have available. But as I said, these are the majority that we see out there, so that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm sure the majority of the people on this call will be familiar with these, but in case we're not, I'm just going to run through them quickly and explain them in a little bit more detail. So studs and plates, joists and trusses. We would typically couple these together and refer to them as lightweight framing systems. And basically that refers to the typical residential framing that you might see on a domestic construction site. Whereas we would be typically referring to glulam, cross-laminated timber, and laminated veneer lumber as massive timber products. So we're going to have a look into this in a bit further. We're going to explain what the difference is between those here. So lightweight framing systems. So as you can see here, and as we sort of saw a little bit earlier on, it is essentially very, very common these days. I'm sure everyone on this call is aware of this construction system. Essentially comprises lightweight timber studs and wall framing and floor cassettes or floor joists, which together can be either fixed together on site or can be prefabricated to make essentially the walls and floors which we typically require in our buildings. What's important here is that this is an incredibly efficient system, but there can be some difficulty sometimes in achieving certain spans. Sometimes we find that the most efficient spans for these floor systems can be sort of 6 meters. Of course, they can go up to 8 meters, or I'm sure some on the call may even say further. But for the most efficient span on most projects, you'll find it will be sort of that 5 to 6 meter range. Which of course means that, if we want to do an office with this floor system, we might need to consider some other products as well, in addition to this system. But as you can see here, lightweight systems are really perfectly suited to residential construction and multi-residential construction, as we can see in this case, where we can make really efficient wall systems, really efficient floor systems, which are both successful from a structural point of view, an acoustic point of view, and also a cost point of view as well. So it can provide some really positive outcomes, as you can see here. So glue laminated timber, as you may be aware, is one of the mass timber products, where essentially it is comprised of rough sawn pieces of timber. So it's, full-size pieces of timber, which have been assembled with all of the grain going in the same direction and glued and pressed together, obviously under pressure. So you can see here, we've got a beautiful project at RMIT University in Melbourne, where obviously these glulam elements have been used as columns and beams. And as you can see, you can get some really beautiful aesthetic, lovely visual products out of this, and you can achieve some really good spans as well. You can also achieve some really good sort of fire design levels, which is something which is made possible through the use of mass timber. Now, it's important to, I suppose, differentiate here between mass timber and lightweight timber. Lightweight timber framing systems comprise timber elements which have essentially do not exceed 75 millimeters in both axes. So if we jump back to the lightweight systems, you can see obviously these studs, they'd be typically 45 by 90 mil studs. Obviously we're exceeding 35 mil there in one of the axes with the 90 millimeters, but the other one is 45. If we come down to the massive timber, obviously this is a 400 by 400 column as example. Both it's exceeding 75 mils in both axes there, and that is our classification for massive timber, and that's why it means that if this was stud size, if we had a glulam element which was 90 mil by 45 mil or 90 mil by 60 mil, we wouldn't consider it to be massive timber. It's only once it exceeds 75 mil in both of those axes. And that's important because whether or not it's classified as massive timber will have an impact on how we look or treat it from a fire point of view. So if we're dealing with these massive timber elements here, we can see obviously, it's quite significant. It is massive, literally, in its size, which means it's going to behave quite differently under a fire load compared to a lighter weight system. Again, it's not the scope of this presentation to talk about fire design. We've got lots of other great presentations on that by people who are much more accomplished and knowledgeable than I am on that topic. So I recommend looking those up. But it is just worth noting that we're talking about two different design solutions when we're talking about lightweight and massive systems. So this is glulam. Then we've got CLT, or cross-laminated timber. So CLT is similar to glulam in that it uses rough sawn pieces of timber, full-size pieces of timber. But in contrast to glulam, here we don't have all of the fiber pointing in the same direction. Instead, we have essentially each layer of the timber is arranged in a perpendicular direction to the previous layer. So we really do end up with cross-lamination. So here we can see, for example, actually on this wall, so this is a cross-laminated timber panel, and we can see we've got the fiber running up and down. The next layer in on this CLT panel would be running from left to right, and the one after that would be up and down. And if there are layers beyond that, then of course they'd keep on running in perpendicular directions. And that just provides really robust and potentially quite useful two-way action, which gives us a bit more flexibility in our designs, which is great. It means that it's very suited for specific purposes and specific uses. It does not make it a silver bullet. It doesn't solve every problem, but certainly a holistic understanding of timber systems does allow us to find the right answers for a project to be successful. So another example of CLT in use on this great project down in South Bank in Melbourne, 55 South Bank Boulevard. We actually do have at least one other presentation on this on the WoodSolutions YouTube channel. So I really recommend, if you are interested to learn a bit more about this amazing vertical extension over an existing building, go and have a look on the WoodSolutions YouTube channel and check it out, because there's some really great case studies there, including this project. Our next mass timber product, which is the last mass timber product we're going to be talking about in this presentation, is laminated veneer lumber, or LVL. So LVL is an interesting one because it's produced in 1200 mil wide billets, which essentially is what this is. So this is 1200 mil wide, this mega column, we could call it, which means that this is essentially what comes off the machine. And from this form, the producer will then cut studs or beams or whatever the product is that you end up using on your site. So that actually means, interestingly, that while this product here would be considered to be a massive timber element, by chopping it up into studs, by 90 by 42 mil studs, or even beams, which might be 300 by 42 mil, we can turn it into a lightweight element. And I suppose that's the key difference between LVL and CLT or glulam. LVL as a product is really, it's quite the, again, it's, one of the sort of the quieter superheroes of the timber world, because like glulam, it's arranged with the majority of the fiber running in one direction. But unlike glulam, it's actually not made of rough sawn timber, so big pieces of timber. It's made out of veneers, which, are thin sort of sheets which are peeled from the tree. So we can see here, this is all one veneer right here. There's another one down here. And what that means is by going for those thin veneers, we're actually spreading out any sort of defects in the timber, which means there's no major point of weakness in this product. Well, there's no, I suppose that the whole product is considered to be stronger than it might be otherwise. There's no point of weakness really. Which just means we get this, incredibly strong, incredibly robust timber product. You can see, obviously, we can build these incredible structures out of it and achieve some really, really great sort of design efficiencies. We can see all of these products, combined into prefabricated systems, as we saw a little bit earlier out on the Tullamore project. This is another brilliant prefabricated project in Melbourne, where we have seen timber framing utilised to deliver this great system. And likewise, we can see it combined with other products and materials which are out there on the market. In this case, we've got steel framing, not light gauge, but structural steel framing with CLT floors, which have delivered the right outcome. So I suppose the point of this section is saying that, yes, we have this great variety of different timber products, but that doesn't mean that we need to use only these products. Different projects have different requirements, as we were saying a little bit earlier, and that means that sometimes we need to consider all of the options to find the most efficient construction system, which it does sometimes mean that we have to take a step outside of our timber world, because sometimes steel or concrete can actually result in a positive outcome in a project which also incorporates the timber structure. Beautiful. So hopefully that sort of summarizes what the options are pretty clearly. Of course, as I said, there's many options beyond what we've looked at today, but those are certainly the key ones, and that's what we're seeing in the majority of construction projects in Australia. Next, we need to talk about project goals, because if we're talking about successful projects and achieving cost efficiency, we really need to understand what are the intentions of this project, because that will, of course, govern basically everything we do with all of our decisions. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with the time, cost, quality drivers in projects, and essentially the saying goes that you can have two of these but not three, and you just need to pick which ones you're going to have. So of course, if you want a very fast project and to quite a high standard, it's going to cost you a lot, of course. If you want a really high standard project for a low cost, it's going to take a long time to build. And of course, if you want to build a project really quickly for as cheaply as you possibly can, the general consensus goes that you have to sacrifice a little bit of the quality. That space in the middle where you have an overlap is where we have our dream projects, which do exist. They do come along every now and then. And I would even say that they might come along a little bit more often than with other systems when you're building with timber. Particularly if you design the right way and if you approach the project in the right manner, of which you can obviously learn all about through WoodSolutions' various resources and the real library of webinars and presentations we now have on the YouTube channel. It's well worth having a look. So the reason why I'm bringing this up, this should be common knowledge for everyone, but obviously if we're talking about cost efficiency today, that's just one part of the equation. We also have quality and time on the project, and there's also factors beyond these that do need to be considered that may obviously impact the project and the drivers of the project. While we're talking about cost efficiency, that might not be the core driver in the project, and more often than not, it's not. So we just need to make sure that if we are looking at, driving cost efficiency, we're also achieving the quality in the program which we're going for. So with those project goals sort of identified and having a good understanding of what they look like, we can then go through and look at these three key considerations. Now, like with the timber products, yes, there's many more considerations in every project, but I've tried to distill these down to what I think are the most important ones, based on my experience with the mid-rise program of over 4 years. So the first one is the project intent. This is something which, I saw a lot over my 4.5 years with the Mid-Rise Advisory Program, where we would be talking with, designers or developers or just anyone interested in a timber project who may be dreaming of, these incredible exposed mass timber public spaces, where obviously there's a very significant budget because we're building for more than just, development profit, or we're building for more than just our small budget, but we're, in these projects, we're building for the good of our society. People were always very inspired by this to see how they could achieve this in their residential situation or in their private development, where they're also trying to achieve a certain profit margin. And my really honest advice in all cases is that, yes, we can get some exposed timber. Yes, we can get some really beautiful aesthetics. We can have a very successful outcome. But in those sorts of environments where we are constrained by our budget, or where we are, looking to reach a certain profit percentage, we need to consider a mixture of timber systems, which will also mean that we have lightweight involved. So, we can see here, obviously, this is a really successful lightweight mid-rise timber frame project. Where, again, because this is a project which is being designed and built for profit, as all apartment buildings are, lightweight systems were chosen, and they delivered really high quality, successful outcome, which obviously also delivered the profit. So if we are looking for a really, an exposed timber aesthetic, or a very grand aesthetic, something a little bit more than our standard sort of plasterboard, then we might need to be considering a bit of a combination of these different systems. It's just a matter of understanding that, yes, they're both timber, but they may require slightly different approaches to design, whether that might be in fire design, or whether that might be in spans and obviously exposure of certain elements, and so on and so forth. So step number one, a key consideration is understanding that, yes, if we're building a multi-residential project, we might want it to look like this, but in reality, to achieve our required outcomes, we might need to have a combination of these two systems. But to the contrary, if we are out there, we're building a public facility, it's something that's going to be there for a very long time. It's obviously there to benefit an entire society. Then perhaps we could be looking at something, a little bit grander with, larger spans and, more suitable for larger occupancies, such as, structures like the Culture House. Which, I've obviously called up a couple of times. I think it's an amazing project, and I would love to get over there one day. I'm waiting for an invite. Okay, so for my second key consideration, again, shouldn't come as too much of a surprise to many of you, but it really is designing for timber. Many times in my experience with the WoodSolutions Mid-Rise Advisory Program, we would see design teams who would have a concrete project which is designed for concrete and steel, and they would come to us and say, how do we redesign this in timber, and can we make it cost effective? And the answer is, yeah, sometimes you can, and you can always redesign a concrete project in timber. But at the end of the day, our most successful timber projects are the ones which have actually been designed with the strength of the timber products in key focus. So, for example, that might be things like the floor spans, of course, having floor spans which are most suitable to timber systems. It might be, providing the required amount of floor depth or structural depth in the floors. Not because timber systems necessarily require a deeper floor system, but we often need to have some sort of acoustic buildup on top of floor systems, and having a little bit more space in that sort of area to actually have an effective acoustic system is going to deliver us high quality project outcome. It's actually going to deliver efficiencies on site, and it's going to make the entire build easier for the project team. So while having a taller building will, of course, result in increased costs from extra facade and extra, structural material from that extra height, by achieving those efficiencies on site and achieving those efficiencies in design, we can often end up with a positive outcome and more cost efficiencies than you might expect if we sort of consider these things up front. I also really recommend, of course, understanding the basics of designing for fire with timber products. As we've seen, different systems generally attract a different approach from a fire design point of view. And just getting your head around the high level design requirements is really, really valuable to sort of help with that design process. Of course, considering how the building will be constructed, another way of saying this is design for manufacture and assembly, or DFMA, which you may be aware of. I know we've also had some great webinars on that topic as well. And really going for the easy wins with timber. Don't make it harder for yourself than it really needs to be. Don't try and put square pegs in round holes. We know that there's a range of different timber products out there which can have different strengths and different weaknesses. We obviously can build the most successful timber projects by using the right timber products in the right location, not trying to achieve things which while incredible, just aren't suited to timber construction. And at the same time, taking full advantage of the strengths of our timber products without, without, just, I suppose, missing them and specifying the wrong products in their space, really. So, really, I suppose what it all comes down to is having a good idea around how to design with timber, which you can get obviously from the WoodSolutions resources, but then also approaching it with the right frame of mind and having the entire project team on the right trajectory at that early stage. Okay, so my last third consideration in this sort of space, if you're looking for cost efficiency in your designs and your specification, interestingly, it doesn't come so much down to the design. This is more so about the procurement and the engagement of a supplier or dealing with a supplier to learn from them and get their sort of inside expert knowledge on how to design and how to specify their products. At the end of the day, suppliers, live and breathe the products which they're supplying. They know the strengths, they know the weaknesses. Again, I feel like I'm giving WoodSolutions a lot of plugs, but there have been many suppliers who've done presentations through the WoodSolutions webinar series. Well worth having a bit of a look at those. But if you are looking at designing with LVL or CLT or glulam or lightweight systems, go and look into a couple of the different suppliers, contact them and see if you can get a bit of feedback regarding your design or regarding your concept as early as you possibly can, because they will be able to provide you some, the best quality advice really regarding their specific product. If you are a little bit lost and trying to find suppliers, but you don't know where to go, of course, the WoodSolutions supplier listing, which is also on the WoodSolutions website, is a really good way to find suppliers for a range of different products, anywhere from timber systems through to fixings, through to even designers. If you are looking for a designer, there's some designers on that supplier listing as well. So in this chart, you can see a couple of different procurement models for different projects. Obviously, we have, the developer, the architect, and the QS generally involved pretty early on. What we really recommend is getting this early supplier engagement going and bringing the supplier on board as early as you can in schematic design sort of stage, or even earlier sometimes, just because the earlier they can be involved, the more of an impact they can have in saving you some time and saving you some cost in your project. So it's, well worth having them there. So that sort of brings us to the end. I suppose to wrap things up, so WoodSolutions, as I've mentioned, is partnering with the AIQS to bring more support and resources to cost consultants working in the construction sector. Obviously, that doesn't mean that we're limiting any of our resources to the AIQS. We're obviously thrilled to be working with them. But if you are a cost consultant, or if you're involved or interested to have questions in that space, but you can't access the AIQS services, still contact us. Of course, we're more than happy to talk from a cost advisory point of view. Timber construction, in case this wasn't obvious, is well and truly taking off around Australia. We've seen some great mid-rise projects. We continue to see a lot of timber framing and obviously mass timber now used in detached residential as well. That's a trend which I think is just going to continue to grow as we keep on going. And then, of course, you can build any scale or any type of timber project, cost, to, I suppose, some sort of efficiency from a cost point of view. But it is important to consider certainly those three considerations I've outlined in this presentation, which really do come down to having an understanding of timber design systems, understanding what precedents are out there, and not trying to necessarily reinvent the wheel. It's understanding what we can do with timber and doing that at its best, rather than trying to take it to a completely new space, which you can do with timber. But if we're going for cost efficiency, trying a new technology isn't always the best way to get there. So, it's good for us to go with what we know really well: CLT, LVL, glue lam, obviously lightweight framing systems, prefabrication, and that's likely to result in a positive outcome if we design with things properly. So that's me. Thank you very much to everyone for your time. Really appreciate, obviously, the opportunity to present to you. And if you do have any questions around any, or seeking any cost advice on any projects, whether you're, in the very early stages or later on, obviously more than happy to assist on behalf of WoodSolutions. Just please do get in touch, and we'll be more than happy to help out as best we can. So that's me.
Okay, thanks everyone. We've got a bit of time for questions and answers, so please add them to the Q&A box. Laurence has certainly got a lot of experience in this area. He was one of the authors of our cost engineering guide for mid-rise timber buildings, which is, as he's mentioned, is there on the website. We'd encourage you to have a look at. So he's got lots of experience here. So feel free to post a few questions for him. So we've got one firstly, Laurence, from Michael, who's asking about CLT construction, and mentions it would appear to require a much higher mass of timber per building area when compared to stick-built systems, which is obviously the case. On this basis, is this system therefore justifiable in the sense of sustainability? Like, does the reduced need for finishes compensate for the extra timber? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. There's probably there's a couple of different things to sort of respond to there, which is good. So I suppose from yes, absolutely. If we're using massive timber products, they do certainly use up more volume of timber than we would typically see with a lightweight frame. And from a cost point of view, of course, if we're using more timber, then there is going to be more cost attached to that per square meter. What's really important here, and I suppose it comes down to like the crux of this presentation, is that those engineered wood products, so CLT, glue lam, LVL, do typically have much higher capacity, a loading capacity, than just a typical lightweight element might have, which means that we can build much bigger with them. So, while we might not build a 15-story building out of lightweight systems, I'm sure if we ran the numbers, who knows, maybe it would be possible, but it might not be cost efficient. Whereas if we're utilizing a massive timber system, CLT or glue lam, or combination of both, or LVL, then from it is actually possible to do, firstly, and it's certainly more cost efficient than at that sort of scale. So I suppose to answer that question, it comes down to the different projects and understanding where the strengths are for different materials. If we're building a domestic residence, so just a 2-story house, the load capacity of a massive timber product maybe isn't required. So it might be sort of overkill from a cost efficiency point of view. But by the same token, if you have a floor system which has a larger span or requires two-way action, or has a cantilever, or any of those things, then maybe a massive timber system is the right option in that space.
It's a good sort of question, Laurence. We chatted about this as the mid-rise program got up and going, and you mentioned about design intent, that if you're simply designing for structural intent, then as you mentioned, mass timber gives you a high level of capacity. Whereas if the intent is also the exposed timber, which we know a lot of designers want, then we're getting that that aesthetic and biophilic sort of feel out of it as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it really is about understanding the project and understanding the project, requirements from the client and from the designer and from all these different aspects. Because, if you are just going for a visual finish, then, there's ways that you can achieve a visual finish without having to specify CLT throughout the project, or even without having to have, significant amounts of CLT in the project at all. You could still have timber finishes or veneers in places and achieve a, beautiful biophilic, natural sort of environment without needing to have, the cost that's associated with the structural element where you don't really need the performance of it. So it just depends on the project and depends on, the drivers, I suppose, there as well. If we're just going to talk about sustainability just for a second, so obviously this doesn't have too much to do with cost efficiency, but it is important to talk about the sustainability side of things. The mass timber products that we utilize in Australia and our lightweight framing as well, obviously, all comes from sustainably managed forests. And in many circumstances, when we're dealing with softwood, in all circumstances where we're dealing with softwood, obviously it's coming from plantations, which are sustainably managed and sort of looked after and grown as we grow, carrots and celery, in tree farms, basically. So what that means from a sustainability point of view is that actually by locking up more timber, by using more timber in a structure, where we're really locking up more carbon out of the atmosphere for sort of more time. And obviously the trees that go into that product are sustainably grown, they're replanted, and it's an ongoing cycle of carbon sequestration from the environment. So if we're talking about sustainability, then so using extra timber certainly isn't a negative. If anything, we could say it's a positive. About using more timber. If your one goal in your project is more sustainability, use more timber. Basically, is the answer.
It's another interesting point. At the moment, there is such an interest with the building community around upfront carbon and the embodied impact of materials. So as you rightly point out, Laurence, in that sense of taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, storing it in the wood products, which then remain stored for life, then the more timber you use is actually a better outcome. But obviously, it's a bit of a balance between what you need for all of those different factors.
Absolutely.
Got a question here from Tony, Laurence. What is the easiest way to understand when mass timber needs to be lined for fire compliance when at an estimation stage?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, because that obviously does have quite a big impact on the cost of the project. Probably the first thing to understand is the type of project and the scale, sort of what class of building it is, and whether fire separation is required in the first place. So that's kind of like the first step. Is it class 1? Is it just a detached house where you don't really require the fire separation of sole occupancy units because it's a detached house, or is it actually an apartment building? That's step number 1. So and that is obviously irrespective of timber, no matter what you're building out of. If it's class 1 versus a class 2 or a retail or an office, that is going to have different requirements from a fire point of view. So worth understanding that in the first place. When we start talking about mass timber versus lightweight timber, we'd say, again, it comes down to design intent. If there is, I suppose, if they're looking to essentially follow the deemed to satisfy requirements, the deemed to satisfy solution, then there will be a requirement for all structural timber to be encapsulated in fire-rated linings. So that's obviously a decision that has to be made pretty early on, whether or not you want to follow the DTS or if you want to go down a performance solution with some exposed timber. Obviously, the opposite of the DTS is if you do go down a performance solution, I should say the alternative to the DTS, is, the client has advised that they want to have some exposed timber, and that's where you need to say, right, so we're going to have exposed timber. Firstly, so that means no lining on that product. But then from a cost point of view, as soon as we're exposing something, we have to think from a fire point of view, there may be an extra thickness required as a part of that element to allow for fire design. we won't go into depth on that. I recommend having a look at another one of the presentations. We've got some great ones on fire design with mass timber. But then also from a finish point of view, these are products, structural products which we're installing relatively early on in the construction project. And that means that, once they're installed, there's obviously quite a lot of construction that has to be completed around them, which means that, they can be protected as best they can, but they may, suffer from some marking from rain, or maybe someone, or as you always get, there could be a little bit of graffiti on site from some of the tradies or whatever it may be, which does often mean that a visual grade finish may require sanding later, at a later stage in the project, to get it to that sort of standard that you can hand over. So if we're going down this performance route, we need to understand, if it's performance, firstly, which elements are performance, and that will obviously come down to the design design requests of the designer. And if it is exposed, then we need to think, is it going to be a thicker element, or is it going to be, a larger section size because it's fire, for fire design? And are we going to have to do other things to it, like sanding it later in the project, to make sure that, what is actually handed over is of that sort of finished standard that you'd expect.
Thanks. If there are other questions, please post them just before we finish up today. But Laurence, what we know with timber buildings, one of the ways in terms of benefit and the cost efficiency is that speed of construction. So certainly compared to concrete, it's a much quicker thing to build, and there's costs around that aren't always considered up front. Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit more just about that and the benefits?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, certainly we do typically see with timber projects, because they are inherently prefabricated. We do see, because all timber products they start their life in a plantation or in a forest, but then obviously they have to go through that necessary stage of milling and processing. That is a perfect time for suppliers to add value to that product. But then also it can, make an easy step across into another sort of manufacturing facility for it to be prefabricated or used in a prefabricated space. That does result in real impacts to the program, so real reductions in program. And we've seen, depending on the amount of prefabrication which is actually taken up in a project, it could result in, reductions of the overall construction program to up to 30%, depending on the project, of course. It's really important to clarify that, it might not reach 30%, it might be 10%, it might be 20%, it might be, 5%, or, some projects might be the same. But generally we do see that program saving. But of course, designing and building with timber does have other benefits, which we do typically see realized in, more cost efficiency in construction, which do come down to things like, cleaner, tidier and safer sites, fewer laborers or fewer workers on site during the structure. If we're pouring concrete, we need, 4 or 5 or 6 different trades, because you have a different trade for concrete supply and concrete placement, rebar tying, rebar installation, form workers. There's, many different trades involved in sort of a concrete slab. If we're just bringing in prefabricated timber elements, whether that's CLT or glulam or any of the lightweight sort of options, it requires a team of, 6 to 8 people per crane, which might be compared to, a typical concrete slab requirement of up to sort of 30 people on site, and sometimes many more people. So there's obviously some real cost efficiencies around there. There's
and some real savings in OH&S and those type of things, which are issues for some of the major companies.
Absolutely. And those things really are, they're realized at the construction stage. I suppose the point of this presentation was very much, a long time before we get to there, if we're designing a timber building, understanding what are really the best products for your project, and getting those decisions right early on, because that's the point where we can make the most impact to our success of the project, for obviously really minimum cost in terms of making those changes. So I certainly, throughout a timber project, you can realize cost efficiencies and realize benefits at multiple different stages. But obviously today's presentation was really just looking at that really early stage, getting those things right first, so we can really maximize the benefits later on.
Fantastic. Well, look, we're just close to 12 now. So thank you, Laurence, for a fantastic and informative presentation. It's much appreciated. And as Laurence mentioned, if people have any questions, Laurence has set up his email address before, lawrence.ritchie@woodsolutions.com.au. So feel free to reach out. And also remind you about technical guide number 51, the cost engineering guide. That's got some great information in there. And also there's a number of cost comparisons there as well for office buildings, industrial buildings and apartment buildings. So thanks once again. Just a reminder that to everyone that these presentations are recorded. So if you want to go back and have a listen to this one or any of the other presentations we've done in the past, just go to that events page and the webinar link there. In 2 weeks' time, on the 26th of July, I welcome you to come along to a case study on the Scion Innovation Hub, presented by Richard Nash, the Executive Director and founder of RTA Studios. So an amazing looking building. So that would be really worth attending. So thanks everyone for attending today, and hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar.